The Veil-Touched. And I don't think it's a nice and soft silk veil doing the touching. Can a demon's breath be so foul it actually takes physical shape? Is it not very caressing veil? Or a form of chaos that just slaps you in the face with a spiked veil, turns you around to where you came from, now completely changed, with horns and all? An army of soldiers were on a mission to explore the other side of the veil. After 6 years, presumed dead, the army returns forever changed and with an apparent appetite for destruction. The Veil-Touched. Methinks they went to hell and back. Also, they're the spawn of Dave from Mini Wargaming. Well, they're not actually his kids alive and in school and that, rather a line of miniatures created by Dave together with lazy Squire games. There are things I like here. First and foremost, I just need to say it, finally, some female space soldiers that don't look any less than their male counterparts. Yay. Before I continue to ramble on about this line of miniatures, I'm going to start painting. And for me, the best place to start with that whole thing is by preemptively striking out some color scheme choice dilemmas. This time by gathering a bit of visual inspiration. Dave has mentioned some of his inspiration while working on this line of miniatures, mental mixes of Mortal Kombat, The Witcher, Vikings, 40k, Willow. That one really struck home. I must have watched that movie an illegal amount of times as a kid. Anyway, my instant interpretation was grimness and darkness. And what would it be like to visit hell, to then come back? So I took a tour through the eyes of Hieronymus Bosch. Or is it Bosch? He seems to have been there, to return with haunting images. Hieronymus was one of the most famous painters of the Middle Ages, and his horrors are real. Can't really show you all that many details. Hieronymus will get me banned from YouTube. But, I mean, this is some original grimness and darkness right here. What etched itself in my mind, apart from the overall awesomeness, the details of hell and the chaotic symmetry, were the colours. I'm no art historian or conservator for that matter. 500 years ago, these paintings probably looked less bleached, more vibrant, and so on. And the colours probably hold significant symbolic meaning. Paint used to mean a lot more back then, and not just what brand they were. But today, to me, the bleached yellow, the ochre, the splashes of blue and green, I really like it. And so, Hieronymus paintings will be my source of inspiration for this paint job. The multitude of miniatures that will come in this Kickstarter campaign box are PVC plastic, moulded in one piece and won't require any assembly. So why is mine in bits that I'm gluing together? It is actually a pre-production resin print, so if you see print lines during the course of this video, the answer is no, yours won't have print lines. Also, for symbolic reasons, I washed my Mini in lukewarm water and some washing up liquid. No, my resin print is not needed, but your PVC plastic Mini out of the box might still have residue of release agent on them from the moulding process. This can, in worst cases, mess with the coming paint, and so a nice wash is a good thing. I wanted to explore a way of painting that might be beneficial if one actually gets this box of minis, to then realize how many little soldiers are actually hiding inside. An approach to painting that can be rather efficient if one wants to get minis on the table fast, but also something that can be used as a foundation for a more detailed paint job. We're eating the cake and saving it for later, probably the only perk of hanging out in the gluttony level of hell. The plan is to build up a grayscale coat on the Mini that can then be covered with transparent paints. Hopefully an instant shortcut to depth, contrast, character, and hell. There's a lot of hell. I start with a black base coat using a black primer through my airbrush. Once the black is dry, I follow up with the zenithal highlight using a light grey paint. There's plenty of videos on how to zenithal prime. I've done one myself, but essentially we dust the Mini with paint from up top and around the Mini at a slight downward angle. I do this quite extensively, only retaining black in the uttermost shaded areas. This zenithal prime will represent the light shining down from that lovely hell sky. Now, a typical quote-unquote zenithal prime is usually done with white paint, and not as heavily sprayed on as I have done with this grey. I'm using a grey to get some more, let's call them steps, between black and white, as you're about to see. Also, as a bonus, I find light grey sprays a little less splattery than white. This can, by the way, be done as well with a black and light grey rattle can. To pick out the details and give us more highlights, I'm going to dry brush on white using one of these massive makeup brushes. I'm being fancy, using preferred paints for every step here, this being a white liquid pigment from Green Stuff World. I think it works well for this type of work, but you just use what you've got. The dry brush action here is specific, only letting the brush hit the Mini on the downstroke softly. Again, mimicking the fact that the light is coming from the sky above the miniature. And next is what I'd like to call a wet dry brush, and that does not make any sense. Imagine a dry brush technique, but with a little more paint on the brush, and working very, very light-handed. We're onto caressing territory here, maybe even veil-touched. This last layer I paint just the very raised bits that will be catching the most light from our imaginary sky. In the end, we have a grayscale Mini that looks pretty well balanced and situated in a hopefully hellishly lit environment. Now I'm going to put transparent paints on top of this. The lack of opacity will mean that the depth, the light map we've just achieved, will remain. Transparent paints can be many things: contrast style paints, washes, inks. I'm going to use a variety of what I got based mainly around the instant paints from Scale Color, mixed up with inks and transparent paints from Golden. The instant paints will give me that gooey contrast paint consistency, the additives a bit more pigment, color when needed. Remember, you can mix whatever you want as long as it's transparent. I also have a medium, in my case contrast medium from Games Workshop handy, in case I need to thin paint down but still retain that contrast paint flow. Some Liquitex medium would probably be a cheaper option. And yeah, wet blending is not only for opaque paints. I wanted to get this Hieronymus looking yellow-brown to warm green to cold green cloth going on both the standard and the cloth. Relying on transparency but also following the grayscale base coat as a guide, purposely trying to get darker, more pigmented paint in the darker areas and thinner, diluted paints on the brighter parts. If you're wondering what the actual PVC plastic minis will look like, detail-wise and that, I can recommend having a look at a video I made painting a miniature from the board game Storm Sunder, because these Veil-Touched will be the same. If you can't be bothered, I can save you some effort and say that the detail on those was great. The mold lines can be a bit of a pain, but then again you've saved half a lifetime on assembly and basing. Blue was something that really stood out to me in the Hieronymus paintings. Even in the furthest reaches of hell there was these bright blue details. And that is what a Mini should do on the table, right? Stand out. At least a little. I'm now trying to be a little more detail-oriented, even though this day was gradually becoming more and more of a shaky hands day. The thing with this technique is that it's a good idea to try and not get paint in the wrong spots, seeing as those mistakes will be seen through the coming layers of transparent paint. If doing fancy fiddly work like me seems one step too far, just simplify. Do the entire shoulder pad blue, skip the shenanigans. These miniatures are great proxies for any future set games. Personally, I think this lady will be real handy as a bounty hunter for my Stargrave venture. On the whole, I'm just glad that more variety, more different style miniature options are pushed onto the market, especially for those that like to buy physical miniatures and not STL files. My proudest moment of this paint job was this red ochre tone. Not only does it, to me, look like I was able to use a magic color picker straight from the Hieronymus book. Then again, he probably used red iron oxide pigment as well, but let's not go that deep. It did bring this hellish demon vibes to everything, and it made me feel like everything was going in the right direction. The last transparent paint to go on was diluted Black Templar contrast paint on all the remaining bits of armor. If you do get a bit of paint in the wrong spot, like I did with this black here, quickly wick your brush in water, wipe it off on some paper and go in and simply push away the pigment, with some following cleanup strokes for good measure. A point worth mentioning, contrast paints and water are not the best of friends, so I prefer keeping them out of my wet palette. I've instead been using a dry palette, more specifically a fancy glass inset for my Red Grass Games wet palette. But I mean, you could use any cleanable hard surface like a kitchen tile. Not actually one stuck to the wall, the paint would drip, but a loose one. And don't go ripping out a tile from your kitchen wall. Now this is what I would call the halfway point. I want to get these miniatures on the table so I can destroy stuff and smite enemies. This year, we could say we're done. Tabletop standard, perhaps. So let's say you painted all your troops to this point, but your commander is going to be given extra attention. Or you think there's just something missing, that little I don't know what in French. So we continue. The following steps, though, can be used individually. It's not like the previous series of events that were all interconnected. I'm going all in, though. To hell and back, remember? If you're thinking, why do all that transparent stuff and zenithal highlight stuff if you're now going to just cover it with regular opaque paints? Well, I'm not. Sort of. I'm now treating our previous hard labor as a middle ground, as a foundation. In some places I want to add more depth, in others more highlights, in some just more saturation. The blue got the most attention, I just wanted it to be richer. I'm kind of following the layers underneath as a guide of where to put darker paints and where to put brighter paints. The great thing is I don't really have to pay attention to getting paint exactly everywhere because of our great foundation. This is more like adding makeup. These horns are a great example. Most of the work is done, but an edge highlight just makes them stand out a lot more. Horns are important, after all. With all the paints I'm using, I've tried to base them on the previous transparent paints. The horns were highlighted with a bright khaki color with some of the original transparent red iron oxide added. The skulls were highlighted with a white tinted with dark umber ink, the same ink used on the skulls in the previous transparency step, adding more and more white for brighter and brighter highlights. For the banner, I wanted more of a texture going, so this is as much highlighting as it is adding a scratched effect. I added white to the original green and yellow instant paints and scratched away with thin brush strokes. The more I worked on this, the more I got the feeling that this is an old piece of canvas. Maybe it was used to cover ammunition crates or something. Maybe it was the old latrine roof, and because of the lack of good standard material in hell, well, you can see where I'm going with this. To highlight the black armor, I used metallic paint, Vallejo's Metal Air Colors to be more precise. It's the only metallic paint I feel comfortable to use with a brush. I don't have that many though, so to get a sort of steel, I mixed the magnesium and the aluminium. This was probably the most detailed step on this mini. I've tried to not get too stuck into details, but with this steel I really just wanted an edge highlight. The effect of having a black-grey, non-metallic surface with only metal shiny edges far surpasses the effect of an overall metal shine, to my eye. Similarly as with the previous paints, I tried to only get the metallic paint wherever the original layer is at its brightest. A dry brush could most probably have done a good job at this. And now for a surprise. Well, not really, because you've already seen the finished mini on the thumbnail, where, I had to lure you in somehow. But that banner was looking real empty. Medieval hell in all honor, but this is a future space soldier. Some army-looking numerals on the banner would do as a fine contrast and a reminder of what millennium we're in. Unless this is like Star Wars and, anyway. My freehand is a shambles. So to my aid comes transfers / decals. First, I varnish. A gloss varnish is preferable, I just couldn't find one. Once the varnish is dry, I put the transfer in water. I brush on microsol onto the surface I want to set the transfer to, only to realize that the varnish has in fact not dried and the instant paint for some reason just starts dripping away. Ignoring that fact, I place the transfer, dip my brush in microsol and very gently nudge it into place. The microsol softens the decal so that it forms itself after the surface of the model. But beware, because of the softening, it can tear easily. Once that was in place, I realized it was in the wrong place. I mean, this is not the middle of the banner. And so, in an instant, the size of this faction grew tenfold, jumping from the 9th Legion to the 91st Legion in a matter of minutes. A transfer can seem a little uneven sometimes, but usually when it dries the whole thing shrinks and stretches and uneven tendencies get flattened out. After the transfer was dry, I varnished on top of it to protect it from further abuse. And while I was at it, I varnished the entire Mini. I have oil paints in mind, and in this case I want to have a protecting layer of varnish going. So might as well strike while the iron is hot. The transfer obviously needs to be adapted to its environment. I went back to some of the trusted, transparent paints originally used, with the intent to stain, but also trying to use some precious, scarce common sense and darken whatever appears to be in shadow. I then flipped the coin using brighter, opaque paints, same again as was used previously on the banner, and highlighted what I had stained too dark and added some wear and tear. No, you don't have to varnish before using oil paint. Yes, I do it sometimes. Oil paints don't interfere all too much with the dried acrylic paint layers underneath, but they can stain stuff, especially matte paints. Sometimes this is the point, and then it would be counterproductive to varnish. For me, this time, I want the reassurance of being able to remove all the oil paint I don't like the look of. A bonus with the varnish is that it does protect the acrylic paint layer from potential too aggressive a scrub with the Q-tip. We're getting to that. You can see I've got my glass palette back in place. Quite handy, really. But how's the kitchen wall going? And by the way, some of the following footage is a little shaky. I blame the tremors caused by fear of this spawn of evil in my hands. Sorry, I don't mean you, Dave. Anyway, I use oil paints, thinned down with white spirit, in this case an odorless version, at different ratios. Sometimes like a wash that smoothly runs out, sometimes a little thicker consistency, more like painting and not just relying on capillary action. All with the intention to add more depth to the shaded areas. The big thing for me with oil paints is the possibility to work without having to worry about things drying on me, and the possibility to, with relative ease, create gradients with a little help from my friend White Spirit. I work in a subtractive method, adding too much paint, then removing excess, either with my brush, cleaned in White Spirit, or with a Q-tip, dipped in White Spirit. The brush is great when trying to get more of a gradient. The Q-tip, when just raised areas, needs to be scrubbed clean. Just make sure to be light-handed with the Q-tip. These oil paint mixes really put our hellish soldier in a grimmer and darker setting. Something I still do find tricky is estimating what the oils will look like when they dry, usually not as saturated or intense as when wet. When I came back to this Mini after it had dried overnight, I thought the red bits could do with just a little more intense red, for example. Finally, all things must rust, right? I opted for this pre-mixed oil wash from Soilworks. When dry, the effect is subtle, yet just the right staining, I think, for this Mini, making it a little more grim, but also tying things together with the red on the rest of the Mini. I also used Soilworks Dark Mud Oil Wash to add some mildew stains to the banner. First, splattering by filling my brush with paint, then flicking it in a general direction of the banner. Going in afterwards with a clean brush and a hint of white spirit on. It dissolves the dots slightly, giving me a nice moldy effect. The base got a massive layering of pigment powders to match Hieronymus' barren ochre hellish landscape. The pigment is set in place by dripping white spirit on, and then, once everything is dry, the entire Mini will get a matte varnish. By the way, if you enjoy the thought of oil paints, but white spirits gives headaches and such, I mean, good ventilation is great, but I've gone to the extent of always wearing a mask when working with the stuff. I'm pleased with how this Veil-Touched turned out. Hieronymus was a sound inspiration. A bit grim-dark, but still packing colour. Something a little medieval looking, yet sporting a very modern warfare banner. I think the sculpt is cool. I think the entire range is cool. Seeing some of the 3D renders, I thought at first that they were a bit over the top with the flashy details, but having this in my hand, I kinda changed my mind. I know there's been a lot of steps involved in this paint job, but for me, none of them have been very detail-oriented. I've painted pretty efficiently, making quite a few sloppy mistakes, but each step in the process sort of hides previous mistakes. And I do hope that there are one or two things that you can take home from this video that will not only help if you're looking into getting a set of Veil-Touched for yourself, but as techniques that can be used on any miniatures. Regardless, please go check out the Kickstarter, linked down below in the description. Also, if you'd like to see more of these Veil-Touched, I'd recommend you to go check out the great Dana Howell. She's been painting some of these too. Just before you go, please consider supporting me and my work by joining the 52 Miniatures Patreon or by getting some of my overpriced merch. See you in hell. Bye.